I've been giving 60 seconds to go through your questions, and you've done that, the recording would automatically start to play as usual. However, I know that you might not be able to go through all these questions carefully by the time the recording starts. So if you find yourself in this position, let's say you're still around number 36 and then the recording starts, I suggest you just go back to the beginning and start answering your questions. By the time you get here, you would have already gotten a little bit accustomed to the general topic of discussion. You'd be more comfortable, and especially if you're able to get these questions before number 36, it will be easier for you to get the rest. But if you're a fast reader and you're able to proofread or go through all the questions before the recording starts, that would be great. That's the best. But if you're not able to, don't be discouraged. Just go back to the beginning and start. Okay? So now we're going to start the recording. Remember, I told you we're going to see everything. Everything written down here will be said. You just have to pay attention. Okay? So let's start.
Hear a zoology student giving a part 4. You will hear a zoology student giving a presentation on the process of moving wild elephants to a new reserve, known as
the process of moving wild elephants to a new reserve, known as, so they're about the name of the reserve, but that's the heading, elephant translocation.
You have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
Okay, so now you're being given the time to look at 31 to 40. We've done all that, so I'm going to fast forward the time a bit.
And we tend to hear a population, groups of elephants. In the presentation today, I want to tell you about how groups of elephants have been moved and settled in new reserves. This is known as translocation and has been carried out in Malawi in Africa in recent years. The reason this is being done is because of overpopulation of elephants in some areas. Population is a good problem to have, and not one we tend to hear about very often. In Malawi's Majeti National Park, the elephant population had been wiped out by poachers who killed the elephants for their ivory.
So in this Majeti National Park, right, the elephants had been wiped out. So in the past, poachers had killed all the elephants. Okay, so what did they do? What happened? The reasons? How come they now became overpopulated even after all the elephants had been wiped out in the past? So that's what he's going to tell us very soon.
2003, the park was restocked and effective law enforcement was introduced. Since then, not a single elephant has been poached.
Effective law enforcement has been enforced. Strict enforcement, and then no single elephant has been poached.
This safe environment, the elephant population boomed. Thing went so well that there were more elephants than the park could support. This led to a number of problems. Firstly,
so he said breeding went so well. Don't worry, all these recordings will be sent to the group as well. Breeding went so well that the population in the park boomed, and this led to a few problems. So they've talked about strict enforcement, they've talked about successful breeding, but the population became so much and it led to some problems. That brings us to the next subheading. I'm going to take it back a little bit.
Firstly, went so well that there were more elephants than the park could support. This led to a number of problems. Firstly, there was more competition for food, which meant that some elephants were suffering from hunger.
So one of the problems, there was more competition for food, and this meant that many elephants suffered from hunger. So greater competition causing hunger for elephants. That's the first problem. Now the second problem is where we have our number 31, damage to dash in the park.
As there was a limit to the amount of food in the national park, some elephants began looking further afield. Elephants were routinely knocking down fences around,
So because the food was limited, the elephants were forced to roam around and look for food, and they ended up knocking down a number of fences in the park. So damage to dash in the park. This one is fences. So anywhere you want to be sure, always you can rewind and listen again. But like I said, the recordings will also be made available to you. Now, you have to pay attention for when he starts to tell us about the translocation process itself. Okay, we have the bulk of the questions in this part, so try and follow.
Had to be repaired at a significant cost. To solve this problem, the decision was made to move dozens of elephants from Majete National Park to Nkotakota Wildlife Park, where there were no elephants. But, obviously, attempting to move significant numbers of elephants to a new home 300 kilometers away is quite a challenge. How did this translocation process work in practice?
How did this translocation process work in practice? The translocation process. He's now going to tell us about how it was done. And that's what this whole part is about, from 32 to 37.
Elephants were moved in groups of between 8 and 20, all belonging to one family.
Elephants were moved in groups of between 8 and 20, all belonging to one family. So a suitable group of elephants from the same dash was selected, all belonging to one family, from the same family. You don't have to fill your question paper in block letters or in small letters, it doesn't matter, right? Because no one is going to mark your question paper. Your answer sheet will be marked. So that's the one you need to be more careful. Because you have to be quick, so you can just write in small letters, write it however, as quickly as you can, so that you can move to the next question. Now, all right, vets and park staff made use of dash to help guide the elephant into an open plain.
Because relationships are very important to elephants, they all had to be moved at the same time. A team of vets and park rangers flew over the park in helicopters and targeted a group, which were rounded up and directed to a designated open plain.
So vets and park rangers, which they paraphrase here as park staff, moved around in helicopters and then used it to direct them to a designated open plain. So vets and park staff made use of helicopters to help guide the elephant into an open plain. Okay? All these words that are in plural form, if you omit the S, you would fail it. It will be marked wrong. It will not be overlooked. So you have to write exactly what you hear. Make sure that when you're listening out for plural forms as well. I've seen people that failed up to 4 or 5 questions just because of S. Either they put it where it's not supposed to be, or they omit it where it's supposed to be. Some people too write it correctly in their question papers, and when it's time to transfer to your answer sheet, they will now collect helicopter and leave the S. So all these little things make the difference. You have to really pay attention. Write exactly what you hear and transfer exactly what you wrote. All right, the next point, elephants were immobilized with tranquilizers.
Then used darts to immobilize the elephants. This was a tricky maneuver, as they not only had to select the right dose of tranquilizer for different-sized elephants, but they had to dart the elephants as they were running around. This also had to be done as quickly as possible, so as to minimize the stress caused.
So this also has to be done as quickly as possible so as to minimize. So most times the words right, like the immediate words before the dash, the words right before the dash can really be helpful if you can hear the synonym of that word. You can pick what is after it and that's your answer. So they had to be tranquilized or darted as quickly as possible so as to minimize the stress involved. So this answer is stress.
As soon as the elephants began to flop onto the ground, the team moved in to take care of them. To avoid the risk of suffocation, the team had to make sure none of the elephants were lying on their chests, because their lungs could be crushed in this position. So, all the elephants had to be placed on their sides.
So they didn't want them on their chest because they could crush their lungs. So all the elephants had to be placed on their sides. Elephants had to be turned on their sides.
One person stayed with each elephant while they waited for the vets to do checks. It was very important to keep an eye on their breathing. There were fewer than 6 breaths per.
So it was important to keep an eye on their breathing. So elephants' breathing had to be monitored constantly. It was important to keep an eye on, to monitor on their breathing. So you see that there's a lot of paraphrasing and, synonyms are used or the structure is changed. But if you're paying attention, you'd be able to pick the missing words. So tracking devices were fitted to the matriarchs.
The elephant would need urgent medical attention. Collars were fitted to the matriarch in each group so their movements could be tracked in their new home. Measurements were taken of each elephant's tusks. Elephants with large tusks would be at greater risk from poachers and also of their feet.
Measurements were taken of elephant tusks. So because the ones with larger tusks would be at more risk of poaching. So information or measurements were taken of the elephant tusks and also of their feet. So data including the size of their tusk and feet were taken. Remember, what is written down here is a summary. So you will not hear every single word said in the recording, but this is a summary of it. So all you have to do is just pay attention and you'll be able to hear what is missing. Then the last one doesn't contain a dash, but we have to hear it. Elephants were taken by truck to their new reserves.
Elephants were then taken to a recovery area before being loaded onto trucks and transported to their new home. The elephants translocated to Nkotakota settled in very well.
So now they're going to tell us some advantages of translocating these animals to Nkotakota Wildlife Park. Okay, and there are 4 advantages mentioned, and 3 of them have gaps to fill. So pay attention.
Has generally been accepted to have been a huge success, and not just for the elephants. Employment prospects have improved enormously.
Employment, so this was advantageous not just for the elephants. Then the next thing he said is employment prospects had improved, enormously. So employment opportunities, that's one of the advantages. The second one, a reduction in the number of poachers and something else. So the number of poachers reduced, and so did something else. The number of something else reduced as well.
contributing to rising living standards for the whole community. Poaching is no longer an issue, as former poachers are able to find more reliable sources of income.
So poaching is no longer a problem because former poachers are now able to find a reliable source of income. So the number of poachers reduced as well, but something else reduced.
Many of them volunteered to give up their weapons, as they were no longer of any use to them.
Then many of them volunteered to give up their weapons as they were no longer of use to them. So they were no longer poachers, so they did not need their weapons anymore. So a reduction in the number of poachers and weapons. An example of conservation that other parks can follow.
More than 24 elephants have been born at Nkotakota since relocation. With an area of more than 1,800 square kilometres, there's plenty of space for the elephant population to continue to grow. Presence is also helping to rebalance Nkotakota's damaged ecosystem and providing a sustainable conservation model which could be replicated in other parks.
So, and it's also providing, a good translocation model that can be, replicated in other parks. So an example of conservation that other parks can follow. They have mentioned the third one. Now we have to listen for the last advantage. An increase in something as a contributor to GDP.
This has been a big draw for tourism, which contributes 5 times more than the illegal wildlife trade to GDP. And this...
So it has been, it has drawn tourism. I think that's how we said it.
Because of the elephants. Only because of all this has been a big draw for tourism, which contributes 5...
So all this has been a big draw for tourism, which contributes 5 times, to the country's GDP, and this is because of the elephants.
Than the illegal wildlife trade to GDP, and this is mainly because of the elephants. So been a dramatic rise in interest from...
So it fades away because the recording is...
The end of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to part 4.
So they'll now give you 1 minute to check your answers. So like I said before, with this time, you just, read the words you put in your dashes, make sure that they make sense. Damage to fences in the park, a suitable group of elephants from the same family was selected. So if you read one that doesn't make sense, for example, had it been for this number 35 now, let's say you wrote side initially, okay? Let's say you wrote side. And now they're giving you time to proofread. And then you now read it. Elephants had to be turned on their side to avoid damage. If you're paying attention, you'd know that because of this word there, which is plural, most likely the word here should be plural as well. It's not very good practice to change your answers at this stage, to be very honest, because usually if you're paying enough attention...
The end of the listening test.
There's a reason you actually wrote it that way, and it's safer to just transfer what you wrote. But if you're sure that as you're reading it, you realize that something is off, you're sure of your reasons for wanting to change an answer. And when I say change an answer, I don't mean just remove the whole answer and put something else, because it's difficult to do that because, the recording is no longer playing. But let's say change the form of the answer, maybe from singular to plural form. You've read it and you realize that this word needs to be plural. You can add it and, hopefully your decision to do that will pay off. Okay? So you read through, make sure everything is okay. If there's anyone you missed, let's say you missed 34, for example. At this point, it's going to be difficult to guess, but it's better you just do it because you just might be right. It's better to guess an answer than to leave it blank, because when you guess, it's a 50-50 chance, But when you leave your answer blank, you've just, there's nothing like. So just fill in anything, you check your answers, fill in any gaps you missed, and then they're not going to tell you that this is the end of the listening test because you've gotten to number 40 and that you have some time to transfer. You have 10 minutes to transfer to your answer sheet.
IELTS test, you would now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.
So at this point, the examiners will tell you to start transferring. They'll give you exactly 10 minutes. This is what your listening answer sheet would look like, except for the fact that it will be colored. But every other thing will be the same. Okay, you can see here listening, you have 1 to 40. So you just have to start transferring. When transferring, I suggest you transfer in capital letters because it's safer. If your handwriting is not so legible, you might get marked down because the examiner could not see or the computer could not really see what you wrote clearly. So to avoid all that, just write in capital letters because no matter how bad your handwriting is, it will be clear when it's written in block letters. Okay, so you then transfer. Of course, 1 to 30, I did it in another video, but I'm just going to try and transfer, 31 to 40. So fences, family, helicopters. So just do it, like I said, in capital letters to be safe. Okay? Let your words be clear. Fences, stress, sights, breathing.
Hello?
Okay, 34. Stress, sights, breathing. I'm also going to leave a copy of these answer sheets so that you can print it and use it for your own practice. Feeds, employment, weapons, tourism.
Hello?
Weapons, tourism. So that's how you do it. Transfer your answers clearly. Yeah. So it's all about attention, to be very honest. It's all about attention. Of course, your proficiency in English, even before taking the IELTS test matters as well. Your ability to understand. So if you're used to watching some foreign movies, it will help. But apart from that, I've seen people who are very good in English, they have a very good command of English, but they still find listening difficult because they're not able to concentrate. So if you're going to do well in listening, you should be able to concentrate, you should be able to focus, and yeah. So let me know if you have any questions concerning this particular exercise, and I'll get to it as soon as possible.